Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. And remember, if you find yourself sitting on a comma in your life, you can also talk to me without a microphone. To explore coaching with me and getting off the comma in your own life, check out my information and book a call with me at offthecomma.com. And I'm also doing something different. I'm curating my own sponsor community, local businesses and professionals who I handpick and who align with our vision here. Be sure to check them out, learn more about them on my website and my YouTube channel. In the meantime, let's get into this week's conversation. And we're back with another cool episode of Off the Comma. I'm so excited about the conversations that we have and the community that we build here on this podcast. And this week is no exception. I am really pleased to have Steph Alston with me this week. And she is someone who is new to my circle and my community. So we know each other through some professional circles, and I'm sure she'll probably share a little bit about that in her story. But I'm excited because I don't really know Steph all that well. So I'm looking forward to hearing the story that she has to share. And I'm going to stop rambling and I'm going to turn it over to you, Steph. Welcome to the podcast. Tell us first, how would you like to be known? And then share whatever you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So I'm Steph. I am a leader, an entrepreneur. I am a yoga teacher and coach. I'm also a mom, and I'm sure I have a lot of other identities that follow me along in life. But most of all, I like to consider myself like a mover and a shaker. I've had people describe me that way in the past, and I think it definitely fits. I am continuously flitting and fluttering from one thing to the next. And I like to keep my projects new and exciting. And I tend to say I have like somewhat of an addiction to novelty. So as soon as the excitement of a project wears off, I'm like, what's the next thing? Where can I go? So I'm constantly trying new things and reinventing myself. And that's not been any exception in my career as well.
Well, and my limited experience with you so far is definitely high energy, and you're already showing up with that high energy. And I love the kind of the experimenter in you is what I think I'm hearing you describe too.
Yeah, woo, I'll take it. I think that other people probably describe me as high energy as well. I have my spurts. I like to be an energizer, an enthusiast. Like we can pick whatever adjectives out of the hat we want, but I definitely like to infuse whatever I'm working on with like my best presence, like bring all of myself to a project. And I think that's kind of why I've ended up in the career that I've ended up in. So I'm actually a yoga studio owner. That's my main profession. Is I teach and lead a team of 14 yoga teachers at a local studio in Loomis, California. So we're northeast of Sacramento. And we can talk a lot more about that in a moment. But really what led me there was this constant pursuit of how can I create experiences for people, and how can I just help people feel welcomed and included and part of something really special. And through my love of kind of event planning plus philosophy and humanities, it all melded into yoga teaching. And here's where I am.
Awesome. Well, I love all the things that you're involved with. And I also love that the things that you're involved with includes kind of teaching others too. So I'm excited to learn more about that part of you, if that's part of your story today. And otherwise, you and I are going to get to know each other over the coming year anyhow. So awesome. Cool. Well, Steph, before we actually get started with the questions, because I ask every guest the same 5 questions, and like every other guest, you and I haven't talked about what you're going to be sharing today. So I'm excited to hear. But I always like to start with this question, which is, as you think about the conversation ahead, the next 45 minutes or so, what would be your intention for yourself?
I think the biggest intention is to share that I'm just a normal human being. And I say that very purposefully because I think often we see people who are living their bliss, for example, or seem to have the dream job. And that's where I am now by some perspectives. And to that, oh, they must have some special sauce or they had a magic recipe that I can't recreate, right? So we see these people who are living the dream and then we think, oh, but that can never be me. And I was there at one point where I saw people living the dream and thought like, oh, well, someday wouldn't that be amazing? But I can never get there. And so it's one thing I find inspiring about your guests on the podcast too, Paul, is that when you hear their story, you realize that we're really all so similar. Like we all have that sabotaging inner voice. We all have those self-limiting beliefs. And so as I share the story, I hope that that's like the big takeaway is to share like my humanity and my realism, and that I still am on very many commas in my life, even though today we'll be talking about one I've moved past, that all of us, I think, have something to learn in realizing that like we're all figuring it out as we go.
I love that. And I so appreciate the reflection on, the connection that we all have and the humanness, which sometimes the word is, the normalness, if you will. But I so appreciate that. And thank you. And my intention for you, for our time together, is to create a space for your story and for you to be able to bring your intention to fruition. And that in sharing your story, someone else or many someone else's out there will hear your story and see a little bit, hear a little bit of themselves in that story, feel a little bit more connected, perhaps a little bit less alone, and in the best of cases, inspired and even empowered to do something for themselves. So I'm excited.
To all of that.
Nice. Well, let's jump in, Steph. So let's start with the first question. And that one is always the powerhouse question. Where in your life have you found yourself sitting on a comma?
Well, so many places. When you asked this question, I really had to think about times where I have felt either stuck or in a pause, so to speak, of like, okay, which route do I go? Where does this sentence end? Like I always imagine like being on a comma. It's like you're maybe halfway through a thought or halfway through an experience, and then you go, wait a second, what's next? In particular, the one I wanted to share today was being on the comma that I think maybe a lot of people can relate to in different ways, but the comma of the pandemic and how that affected my job, and actually that's what sent me on the trajectory to where I am now. So looking back, that whole hindsight being 2020, I can see the puzzle pieces fitting together. And I've told my story to a few people in the past couple of years where they go, how did you get to where you are? Like, tell me how, like, what brought you to this career field? And I'm like, honestly, I would not have been here if I hadn't been pushed to get past my comfort zone. So to be a little more specific, I was teaching yoga for a couple of years. I had kind of figured out that this is what I wanted to do. But as many yoga teachers, it's a very broad subject. And so I was trying to figure out, well, what is my voice in yoga teaching world? What is my niche going to be? And the studio that I was teaching at closed. And so when the pandemic happened, a lot of studios pivoted to virtual teaching. Mine did not. And I felt very stuck in like someone else holding the keys to the kingdom, someone else being responsible to give me permission to teach. Like I felt like, well, if I don't have a studio that's giving me space to lead a class, how am I supposed to reach people and connect with students? Like I always saw it as like, you get the certificate, you go get job is given to you, you do work. So I was like, I don't have a place anymore to do work. And what does this mean for me now in teaching? And like, what does this mean just in a lot of ways, like a lot of direction as my identity now as a person, as well as a career professional. So that was a really big comma to be sitting on, was like, wait a second, kind of the rug getting pulled out from under you.
Yeah, I hear that. And it seems like you describe it as, now I don't have a place to work. And then you also talked about, and that was kind of also my identity. And it just seems like there were a lot of things packed into this situation unfolding beyond just now, where am I supposed to do my work?
Mm-hmm. Yes, in many ways. And while it might seem now like, oh, well, so many people teach yoga online, it was not that way.
No, exactly.
4 years ago. And I think a lot of professions, as you might have experienced in your own way, like a lot of us had to figure out, well, how do we do this now? what is normal going to look like now with these new expectations, regulations. It was such a big learning curve. And so at that time in particular, like the concept of me starting my own yoga business didn't even occur to me as a possibility. I think maybe even if someone had suggested it, I don't know if they did, but at the time I was like, oh, I'm super unqualified, don't have the resources. Like, also starting a yoga business at that point was running a studio. So
Hmm.
if anyone in the middle of 2020 had said, well, go start your own studio, it's like, that's not happening. No one is starting a new brick and mortar business to have people in person. Uh,
Yeah.
and
Well, and
yeah,
if I may, and from time to time I'll jump in and kind of interrupt. So if you're in the middle of a story, just tell me, wait, let me finish. But
go for it.
um, it just seems to, I mean, and so many people can resonate with this, right? Because like you said, so many people had to figure this out and there wasn't a model to follow. It's like, oh, you just switch over there and do that. We know this now because of how everything has changed, but at that time you didn't. And what I also understand too is that it wasn't even just a matter of, well, I need to learn the technology to go online. It's yoga is a physical pursuit, right? It's a touch environment. You've got to be able to see what your students are doing and be able to give feedback and that sort of thing. So I imagine there had to be an element of, is this even possible to do any other way?
Yes, there was a lot wrapped up in there. And I would say, like, in just thinking about it, it feels like a big comma. Like, I was like an abnormally large size comma in the middle of a sentence. Like, someone did not format this page very well because I probably made it bigger in my head than it needed to be. But isn't that
Mm.
sometimes how it goes, where you like make a mountain out of a molehill? And when I was teaching yoga. So I got my certification actually in 2018. So just 2 years
Hmm.
before the pandemic. And that had been a long road to even get there and decide that that's what I wanted to do. But a big part of it was that interpersonal connection. My experiences so far of yoga had all been in studios. So literally with teachers physically present. The way I was taught to teach yoga involved a lot of hands-on assisting, which is a big part of yoga teaching in many traditions. Is that physical contact with your student. But in addition to that, I had then been teaching at this studio for nearly 2 years. So I'd established a local community of like students. We all share students. So I don't say they were just mine, but like there were followers of my classes. I had people that came to my classes weekly. I had relationships with those students. So one of
Hmm.
the big crises, I suppose, was not just, oh, there goes my job, but it was, wait a second, where are my students? How do they find me? How do I find them? And in yoga, the student teacher relationship is really important as well, not just traditionally, but um, in the whole practice of it. Like you usually have a teacher or a mentor or a guru, like someone that you follow, and that is like the disseminator of wisdom. Like you have someone that is kind of your teacher, or you find a
Hmm.
couple people who are your teachers. And many people will study with someone for a couple of years and then they might move on. But that student teacher dynamic is really important. And so when my students disappeared, it was also kind of that feeling of like, well, wait, now I'm just supposed to go out and find new students. Like,
Mm.
what does that even mean? And you don't just go to another community, and especially during COVID, just show up and say, oh, you're teaching online. I used to teach at this studio. Can I just teach online with you? Like there's a trust that's built up with communities as well, that it just felt so overwhelming to think of trying to start over.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And just kind of layer upon layer of change and kind of enforced uh, flexibility, if you will, or adaptation. I'll go ahead and jump into the second question, and then we can go back and forth as much as you need to. But I think this is a good place to ask it. So, as you look back at that comma at that time, what did it create for you? You've shared a little bit, but kind of go a little deeper. So now this has happened. What did it create for you? What was coming up for you at that time?
It's interesting to think of what did it create at the time and what would I say now that it created. Because
Mm.
now I would say it created opportunity. It created a lot of space for me to get really clear on what I was about. At the time, it felt like it was creating a major problem
Hmm.
financially. And also, like, I recognized that for some people during the pandemic, the switch to remote working was kind of nice and a break. And there was like a lot of people making sourdough bread. I never went through a phase like that. It was very stressful. I felt very like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next week? What about next month? It was constantly are we going to open? Are we not? I was staying connected to the studio I was at, plus trying to find supplemental work. So at the time, it felt like it created a lot of chaos. It created a lot of like, I also have 3 little kids, and my youngest was not even 1 year old yet. He was born in May of 2019. So I was also coming back from like just barely a year postpartum, which also having a physical job, that's very challenging. So that's why I said like my identity was really wrapped up in this too on a personal level. And so it felt like we have no structure. We have no predictability. That's what it felt like at the time. Now, when I look at it, I'm like, wow, it really allowed me to step into my strength and realize that I was capable. And a lot of that was through help of a coach. That was the first time that I got coaching from someone who had gone through McLaren Coaching's program, which I know, Paul, you went through that training, and so did I. It's different years. But at the time, someone had offered online, and this is, I hope I'm not sliding too much into another question. But someone had offered online, like, hey, so-and-so is offering coaching sessions to women whose careers had been affected by the pandemic. And I was like, I qualify. That's fantastic. So I said, what do I have to lose? Because at that point, I was willing to try anything. I felt a little bit desperate in some ways to just figure out something. I think I don't like to sit still for very long. So that was also hard, feeling like it was just an endless waiting game with it was an indefinite timeline of like, we didn't know how long we'd be in lockdown and isolation. Good luck. So I took up the coaching offer, and my coach was Alexis Bernard. And I had an amazing experience coaching with her. And it's funny now thinking back, like I was probably a terrible client. And I say that just because like I recognize I was so stressed, and I don't think I really understood coaching, which like I guess there's really no such thing as a terrible client, but I don't think that I followed through on a lot of my declarations at the time.
Yeah.
Now that I understand coaching more, like I take so much more advantage of it.
Yeah. Well, that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up. So this is really a point I would love to jump into, dig a little deeper if we could, because I think this is something that everybody went through the experience with pandemic, right? So we can listen to your story and we can kind of make some assumptions and connect that to our own. Yeah. I get it. I understand. But one of the things I like to do in the conversations on this podcast is like, no, what was it like for you? So this is perfect how you set this up for me. Thank you. But so you reached out, took advantage of an opportunity to work with a coach, and you've already kind of acknowledged this is what it created then, this is what it creates now. I'm really curious about the in between there. What kinds of things were you taking to your coach? What kinds of things, as a result of this tremendous comma kind of being slammed upon you, what were you looking for help with from your coach?
That's a great question. I thought that I was getting business coaching, which I did. I mean, there was like a lot of business questions wrapped up in there. I really approached it from the place of, okay, I need help with my career direction. And she was offering coaching to people whose jobs had been affected. So I thought it was going to be strictly business coaching. So what was really cool is once you do the intake with a coach, and especially in the way that we've been trained, it was like you could put any goals on the list. It could be any topics that are personal or professional. And actually, like we understand so much in the ecology of change study and coaching, like you can't just affect one piece without the other, right? Like if you change one area of life, it is going to affect all the rest. And so I actually put things on there that were like relationship to my kids, relationship to my spouse, some personal hobby goals that I had, like personal fitness goals. I just like went for it because I was like, oh, I could put 6 things on here. So one thing was, what am I going to do about my job? But it actually turned out to be so valuable for me to evaluate my entire life at that moment, to say, well, wait a second, how am I taking care of myself? I didn't realize how bad my like stress had gotten. How am I also spending this time that maybe I don't have to worry about going to a job every day at a certain time of the week. I can
Mm.
also focus on these relationships with my family and with my friends. It helped me get really clear on things that I wanted to set aside intentionally to say, this used to be part of my identity. Part of that was being a musician, which I know you and I had kind of touched on a few weeks ago at a different event. I considered myself a musician for many decades. And I intentionally, at that time during the pandemic, realized how much I was okay with setting that aside for other things. So,
Mm.
what I got out of coaching ended up being really rich and valuable in every area and not just isolated to my business questions.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah. What would you say, kind of as you look back on that, what was the greatest challenge? We're going to move into some more questions here in a minute in terms of the 5 questions, but kind of reflecting back on that comma, what was the greatest challenge?
So, the greatest challenge of that comma time,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would say the greatest challenge was me getting over myself as a barrier. And I mean that in the way that I truly did not believe I was capable of starting something without someone else. And so at the time, like I mentioned with the yoga studios specifically,
Mm.
I did not think it was possible for me to create a yoga teaching experience, connecting with students, maybe even running a yoga business without someone who held the keys to a studio in person. And if I couldn't see myself as ready to step into
Mm.
studio ownership, like, yeah, Alexis really challenged that in me, as we know coaches do, to say, like, is that really true? Like, where does that belief come from? Like, what would it look like if you didn't do it that way? It really helped me see how much I was holding myself back. And that was the biggest challenge, was because then once you see it, you can decide if you're going to do something about it or not. But once I saw it, I was like, damn it. I don't have excuses. If I can start to believe that I really can do it, well, now what? Now, what would that look like? It got really experimenty and then it started to become fun. But that it took a few months to get there.
I particularly love that. I just got goosebumps because it just came up for me as you were sharing that. First of all, I just want to acknowledge you. It's like the possibility, right? Just the whole possibility element there. And then with the phrase that came up was, if you can see yourself on the comma, then you can see yourself off the comma.
Yeah.
Visualizing, right? And so it kind of started with I see where I am, I see where I'm stuck. And then it sounds like something deep within you knew to look for support because you weren't going to just be fine or okay with what you were currently sitting in. Maybe you didn't know exactly what it was going to be, but the coach helped you kind of crack open and unlock the potential that something deep down inside was able to sense or was aware of. I'll put that back in your hands. You react to that however you want to, and how does that land with you, or correct me?
Yes, no, it sounds spot on. And I'm realizing, not just now, but tying it back to that feeling of I was very much in a victim-y state. And I say that in that
Mm.
sense of, in homeschooling world, we call it the Tanaki monster. It's I can't spelled backwards, but it's that like, creeps in on
Mm.
you and you go like, oh, there's that sneaky thing again. I was just continuously in this like, oh, I can't, I'm incapable. I don't know. I thought when I coached with Alexis, she was going to give me answers, right? You're like, oh, there's a business coach. Great. She's going to tell me what to do next. And surprise, coaching is all about helping you find your own answers and empowering you. And so it was very much just turned back on me like, what are you going to do about it, Steph? Right? Like if I see that I'm on the comma now and I can see what could potentially get me off of that comma and into another like greener pasture, why wouldn't I take that chance? Because anything was going to be better than where I was.
Mm-hmm. So the next question is, what have you learned about yourself as a result of sitting on this comma?
What I learned about myself mainly is that I am much more capable than I give myself credit for.
Mm.
That there's this Marianne Williamson quote that I know Cami shares in coach training too, but it's about how we're really like there's no reason to play it small. Like we're really afraid of how powerful we are. And it's interesting to see that when you look back at
Mm-hmm.
a situation that now feels resolved, so to speak. Like I can see that now and be like, oh, I had the power in me the whole time. Whereas there are things currently in my life where I'm on the comma and going like, yeah, I don't know if I have power here though. It's funny, but it feels like, well, yeah, now I can see my power there. But that's the biggest thing that I truly learned about myself was like, oh, I am wildly capable and actually can create so many things. And then I learned how much that momentum was valuable for me, like picking up the energy and the speed of success, so to speak. But wasn't so much just like success business wise. It was more of like when you take those chances and see that like the feedback is great and the students are loving it and you are able to make connections and the things were happening. Seeing the dream start to fit together was like, oh, well, now what if I do this? What if I pull the string here? Like it makes it a lot more fun to play with that existential puppet show. Use whatever for you want. But I realized that I really was more in control of my destiny.
What would you say? Because this is really powerful. What shifted for you to help you see it that way?
I would say it was a lot of little shifts, continuously feeling supported in people cheering me on, and not just like, you can do it, Steph, we believe in you. But I felt like Alexis really believed in me. And maybe it was the awesome coach therapy, version of her that like, she's been so well trained too to come in and support people. But there's this amazing quote by Ram Dass. I have it hanging up in my office at the studio, and it says, we're all just walking each other home. And I've always really believed in that as a life philosophy anyway, but I see that very much in coaching. Like it is a walking alongside someone to believe that they are capable in getting back to this place, whether it's creating a home within themselves, reconnecting with the divine, however you want to look at it. It's like, that's our job as humans, is just to like be there beside someone else and hold them as wholly capable of getting to where they need to be and what is truly going to land. And I felt that from Alexis. And there were a few other really key people that when I started to tell them like, hey, so I think I'm going to branch out and like kind of make my own yoga business. And they were like, yeah, yes, I see that for you. And I was like, okay, do you want to partner with me? And they would say, yes, let's do it. Like they were in on my crazy ideas and really like let me lead. But it wasn't just it didn't feel like lip service. I felt like there were key people that I felt like truly were going to walk this path with me into the unknown. They were maybe just as crazy as I was to say, like, could we make this thing happen? We came up with lots of fun ideas, but that's where I was saying the slowly but surely feeling those successes. It was little things, one after another, like placing all the dominoes in the line to say, okay, this is starting to stack up. And it was things like, I had a friend who did wedding videography, but no one was getting married publicly because it was the pandemic. And so I reached out to her, and I had a friend with a barn on her property that she wasn't using for anything at the time. So I said, can we do yoga in the barn? Because it was open air. And hey, would you come make a commercial for me? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, this is my vision. Let's storyboard it. She made this whole amazing, like 2-minute little commercial that I could put on my website. I learned how to make a website. I started like playing with all these ideas of like, what would it look like to market myself as this virtual yoga teacher that's independent of any studio? And all these people that said yes, these people that were continuously like, yeah, okay, sure. I've never made a commercial before. Let's do it. Your idea sounds fun. It was just people willing to step in and see the possibility too. Like, that's what really made the difference over time for me to feel like, oh, I can enroll people in this dream with me. And I didn't even languaging yet. I didn't even know like what the concept of enrollment was. I think really till I read The Art of Possibility, which that book was just life-changing for me too. But I can see that now. Like that's what I needed, was people who could see possibility in me and people who were willing to let me play with possibility in the just like playground of life. And that really made a big difference.
You answered one of my questions, which was, oh, what did you end up doing? So yoga in the barn is cool. And I'm sure there's more to share there. I really love that, by the way. And I just want to reflect back. So, you specifically said, people who could see possibility in me. And as you were just describing for the last couple of minutes, the word belief just kept coming up. Like it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sort of started with other people believing in you and then you believing in yourself. Maybe I don't have that in the right order, but it sounds like it was this mix, this combination of, belief feeding itself, feeding each other belief, and then the belief feeding upon itself and growing into possibility.
Yeah, it feels like I had these really deep down beliefs because I know they were there even before COVID. Like I came out of yoga teacher training really believing in yoga in a certain way. And we don't have to necessarily go down that whole rabbit hole right now, but I knew like the kind of students I wanted to reach, for example, why yoga teaching was important to me. And that's a really key part of like being a strong yoga teacher, but it had gotten buried by self-doubt, cultural expectation, like, just layer it on. And so I never told people the really deep down beliefs about why I was doing, like, in coaching, we talk so much about helping people connect with their why and their purpose. Well, mine was in there and I knew it, but I would just like journal about it and I wouldn't tell it to anybody out loud. And so the first step was the bravery of sharing out loud in little bits, like testing it out with trusted people to say like, hey, so this is actually what my vision is. So to share specifically, I had this idea for a yoga collective. I wanted it to be a wellness and yoga studio-based place that had nutrition coaching, wellness offerings in addition to yoga so that it was a holistic service. And I had this vision of it and I wrote it down in the little book and I never told anyone about it. And so then during the pandemic, when this started to happen, and I started to see like, well, maybe I could start doing this in a virtual way. I reached out to my friend Amanda and I said, hey, so I have this idea and this might sound kind of crazy, but like, this is kind of what I'm working towards way in the distant future. I don't have a timeline on it. Like I still put all these qualifiers of like, don't think I'm totally crazy, but this is what I see. And that's where she was like, yeah, Steph, like, let's do this. What would that look like here? And I said, well, let's start with a subscription box. Let's make it where we can mail kits to people to do workshops with us monthly online. So we do a Zoom workshop, but they can watch it later. And every month it's a different theme. So we bring that in-person experience to their homes. They can smell things, they can touch things, they can interact with the stuff just like we would have done in person, but they get to do it at home. And so we're like social distancing and everything. And it became so fun. And we did it actually for 2 years. We ended up doing this subscription box monthly workshop. And by the end of it, like we did our last one in person, because at that point, everyone was able to come back together in person. And it was sold out by that point. We built a really good following. But that was one example of someone who I started to share a little bit of the dream with. And then my other friend, Tess, was the other one that I said, hey, I have this idea, but I see you doing this with me. Is this something you would be on board with? Like, would you even ever consider maybe somewhere in the future when pandemic ends that we could do this? And she was the first one who said, oh, you want to create like a collective? And I was like, what's that? And she was like, it's like all these little businesses or people with a similar vision, overall similar philosophy, but they come together and like bring all their different strengths. So sometimes you see it in retail settings, or if you've ever gone to like a place where they have almost like a food court, but there's like little restaurants all in one big restaurant. That's kind of like what she was describing. And I was like, yes, something like that, where it's one big business, but with a lot of little businesses that were like an umbrella and we all work together. And so now, like my studio is called Santosha Yoga Collective, but that all came from experimenting during the pandemic with sharing with trusted people who saw the possibility, which then helped me see. So you're right. It was like I kind of believed it, but then they believed it. And so then I believed it more and we just kept stacking.
Yeah, I love that. And that's very meaningful to me. I'll self-reference for a moment. And it makes me think, a collective isn't just a business model, right? I mean, humans have been participating in collective models and concepts since we began. And I just left, I'm on a road trip myself right now, and I just left visiting some dear cousins of mine who live in a small town. And as they were describing what their life is like and the things that happen in town and the ways that all of their neighbors and the citizens in this small town interact, it's like it's the same thing, right? They're all on the same streets, they're doing business together, they shop with each other. And then in times of crisis, this is how they all pool together and share their resources to help people in need or the community in need and so forth. So it seems like, to bring it back to you and your experience, this community aspect seems very important to you.
Yes, very much. I think it's integral to any yoga studio. I consider a yoga studio to also be like a spiritual community. And I'm not referencing like any particular religion, but to have a sense of something bigger than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so people who come together and support one another because of a greater purpose or greater cause. And specifically in yoga practice, I think, for one thing, healing happens in community and not in isolation. And so that's huge as well, because healing through yoga, I mean, yoga is one of the like original therapeutic modalities.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's such a holistic practice of body, mind, and spirit. But especially as it related to coming out of the pandemic, I think we all saw, and I know I'm generalizing, but especially in yoga and wellness world, how much like people needed connection, people need accountability and support. They need consistency, they need trust. And so to be able to have a community, and like, I don't think any yoga studio can survive without a thriving community.
Mm-hmm.
Like we need each other, but also as teachers at the studio, we need each other as fellow yoga studios. So we have sister studios we work with now where we'll collaborate and share community and do retreats that we co-host. I think it's so valuable. And I'm looking at it on a bigger global, like human scale, but a worldwide community, like it just ripples outward.
I'll say this, it could be incendiary. I don't mean it to be, but maybe I do, but it flies in the face of competition.
Yeah, for sure. Because yoga kind of gets attached with fitness world, which I don't think is a bad thing at all. But fitness world has a stereotype of being very competitive. And like gyms, and even within gyms, personal trainers working within gyms can be very competitive with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And in that way, it's very unique. Like running a yoga studio and yoga team takes a very different kind of skill set and consideration than like we're sharing students and sharing community. And many of us teach the same students throughout the week.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're working with people one-on-one. And even if we are, like, it's not just isolated to what we can do for them or with them. And so it's been a huge shift, I think, even in the mindset of the people who stayed on to work for me when I took over the business I own, or that I've hired on. Like I talk a lot about this, like building yoga studio owner community. And that's kind of a radical idea. And even in this area, like people tend to play it pretty close to the vest, right? They still have that, like, well, I don't want to share my trade secrets, but I'm like, the rising tide lifts all boats. Like if we're all thriving and growing, we're serving all of our communities that much better. And so far it's proven to work out really well for what I'm doing. But it takes a little bit of like building trust, building rapport with people so they see that like you're not trying to undermine whatever beautiful thing they're doing, but how much richer could it be if we're all sharing what we love together and making it that much more abundant?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's so different than, large business environments and so forth, right? I mean, first of all, are there even such things as trade secrets anymore? And then secondly, I mean, usually my experience with, yoga in particular and other similar types of professions, right, is you're community based, and are you ever really going to be at risk of losing your business from, another business? There's plenty of customers to go around, and there's so much untapped market to tap into new clients or to bring new people into the space, right? So,
and that's definitely how I look at it in that way too. Like I really believe yoga is for everybody, and I really mean that when I say it. We have students at our studio from age 2 all the way to 95, and so in that way, like, it is totally possible to continuously have people to work with, people to serve, people to collaborate with. But yeah, I think it can be that like scarcity versus abundance mindset, or thinking like, oh, someone else is going to do it better than me and take my students. But really in yoga world too, and here in Sacramento, it's a pretty small, I mean, there's a lot of yoga here, but it's a small
Mm.
community, that a lot of our students go to multiple studios. Like they'll go practice with many different people and
Mm.
teachers. So I'll get teachers that come into our studio and they're like, oh, you know, so-and-so who teaches over there. Yeah, they teach here. Many yoga teachers teach at multiple studios at the same time. A lot of my employees also work for 2 or 3 other studios. And so in that way too, I think it's really necessary to have that goodwill and collaboration and support of one another, because I really want yoga to be out there for everyone.
Mhm.
And if I am offering something like really cool at our studio, like we have a little yogis program going on right now for the summer that's for ages 2 to 6. And I saw that same teacher who's teaching this series at our studio is now launching it at another studio 40 minutes away from ours. And I'm like,
Mhm.
hell yeah, go for it. I'm so glad you're doing little yogis over there, because those moms and dads are not driving to our studio to do little yogis. They need it over there. And so for her to take a model that's working and to take it to another place, I'm like, great, you're reaching more people. And that's more people that are happy and finding yoga. So it definitely takes a shift of not saying like, oh, you're taking our program and making it like, what, you're like replicating it. But I'm like, why reinvent the wheel? It's really meant for everyone, and we just all thrive together.
Yeah. Well, and Steph, it sounds like even just, in the years since you first experienced this comma during the pandemic, it just seems like your whole perspective has evolved as well, because you've gone from, oh my gosh, what am I going to do for work and how do I do the work? And then, making a living and sustainability and those sorts of things to it's evolved from, it seems as though it's evolved from a vocation and a profession to a movement, and that it has so much more meaning for you overall.
Absolutely. I think I started off really looking at it as a job. I mean, yoga was important to me and valuable beyond that too, which
Sure.
is why I chose it, because I felt like, well, if I need to work, I want to do something that's meaningful and really is helping people. I worked in retail and also other corporate jobs for a long time that didn't feel as fulfilling. And so I felt like I don't want to sell people things. I would
Mm.
to share experiences, help them like feel better in their body, all of that. But it did definitely shift into me seeing it as um, a movement of like loving kindness and compassion in the world. I also see it as a lifestyle. So I absolutely have shifted even in the way that I live, through what I've seen yoga is now able to do, and the work I'm able to do with it in the world as well. It really is so life changing, and I am not using that flippantly. Like it is a total 180 from, I think, the direction I was looking in at the beginning of the pandemic, which was this like dark, endless tunnel of
Hmm.
ability, to instead like, I'm looking up this mountain. And actually I use a different metaphor with a friend of mine, that like I see the studio, but moreover what I'm doing in yoga world now as a tree, and I'm committed to the tree, but we're in like sapling stage right now.
Mm.
The last couple of years has been like digging up the soil, getting it ready to replant. We did that. We've seen the sprouts, like, the shoots are growing. So I'm committed to the tree, and I see just like decades ahead of amazing growth and work and possibility and endless fun and things to do and try. Like, I don't think I'm going to get bored anytime soon, but yeah, it's for sure a different direction.
Yeah, for sure. I love that metaphor too about the tree. I've used a similar metaphor for my own experience and my own path in the past, and it was a garden metaphor. So anything having to do with the plants and the soil really resonates for me from a metaphor perspective. And I think because I'm such a terrible gardener, I'm not very good. But
I am
let's,
too.
oh, hey, then we can garden in our minds, right? And
Yes, that's
garden.
what works for me. Oh my gosh. My older sister would say, because she was big into homeschooling, like you wouldn't pull up a plant by its roots to see if it's growing. And I try to keep that in mind all the time. Maybe also because I am a bad gardener, but
Mm.
that I can trust that all of the work we're doing right now, like fertilizing the soil, watering the plant, like it's going to result in some really beautiful things, but trusting the process.
Mm.
So yeah, the garden metaphors work really well for my brain.
Nice. So the fourth question, then, I feel like you've already answered a fair amount of this, but I want to ask it again in case there's more that you would add. So what has changed for you as a result of sitting on this comma?
Um, well, I don't know if it feels like too much to say everything, but it really changed. Ooh, yeah, my relationships, my career. I mean, I went from thinking like, okay, maybe yoga teaching is over for me to now running a thriving studio and wellness center in my hometown, with amazing clients. But it's also, as I was talking about like the change in my career, it was also the shift I needed to meet the people who were going to make the dream happen. Like I think where I was at the time that I was on the comma, I didn't know the people yet. And like
Mm.
realize that I didn't know the people. It's like, people will say like, "Oh, go find your people, go find your tribe or your community, like the people who are like-minded and want to support you." And like I truly mean that in such an honoring way. Like you want to find the people who are with you, who are going to stick it out, who are going to be there. And I didn't know how much I needed those people. And so being able to find or be pushed into this trajectory of like, okay, I'm going to try to go off on my own kind of, but I don't think I did anything by myself during COVID. That's what was really interesting is when I look back, I don't see any of that as being a lone wolf thing. Like I was running a sole proprietorship and it was technically just me, but everything that I did was because of or with other people who believed in what I was offering and was willing to show up and try it out, or were willing to give me the benefit of the doubt, take the risk. And it turned into great referrals. I ended up teaching on a grant program for an elementary school that was like 45 minutes north of here, but they had respite care for their special needs teachers who did not get to shift to online teaching. I don't even know if get to is really the right term, but
Mm.
they shift to virtual teaching when COVID happened, because for a lot of those students and with their IEPs, they had very specific needs and needed to stay in classroom learning. And so those teachers were very isolated on campus. So I would go up to this community and weekly we would do outdoor yoga after their block of teaching. And that was so valuable. So it's like I met amazing people that like my whole model was I bring yoga to you. Like I knew how much yoga was needed and that was that inner belief, but I think it changed that for me of seeing how it truly was needed and how much like yoga wasn't just a nice idea or something to do to like decompress after a long work day and get your fitness in. It was like these people needed respite. They
Mm.
needed restorative practices, and that just like fueled my fire so much. So yeah, meeting the people, changing the way that I interact with others in my relationships in life, but also just seeing yoga for like the way that I believe in it now.
Hmm. Well, and it's like, this whole thing that we do as humans, or at least in this country, everything happens for a reason, and that must have been the reason that happened from it. And yet what I hear you saying is that I could have gone down a different path. This pandemic happened. It happened to all of us, but it definitely knocked us all off of our path. And the meaning I take from it is that it created a whole new path for me, a path that I might not otherwise have seen. And as you said, it helped people see the things differently for themselves as well. Like you said, like yoga being an after work pursuit, to now, wait, this is definitely meaningful for me as well. There's tremendous benefits that it can offer. So yeah, like
I don't know if I would have met those students. I mean, maybe in another way, but it also gave me the opportunity to take a trauma specific yoga training. And then through all of this work I was doing, I was teaching a virtual class once a week that we had people from all over the country because it was virtual. I was able to have guests from Texas and Utah and like Ohio and all these places.
mhm.
But that helped me meet a one-on-one client that I had for a while doing a trauma-based practice specifically for her needs. And I don't know that she would have had that or met me if we hadn't been able to meet through COVID. And also like doing one-on-one prenatal yoga with people who like birth classes stopped. And people were still having children during the pandemic, but a lot of the resources for expecting parents disappeared. And I think a lot of the hospitals still have not brought back birth classes. And so it was really interesting to be able to also do that work, like going to someone's home that, like, we made that trusted agreement to like work one-on-one together so she could have the support through pregnancy. It just really showed me how valuable that community is, and to have services like yoga that support people in their body and their mind during a really stressful time for everyone. I would not have been able to meet those students any other way.
Mm-hmm. Your passion for it and the meaning of it in your life definitely comes through. So I just have to acknowledge you for that. Steph, last question. What does getting off the comma look like for you?
Well, and I'm not sure if this is exactly how you were asking it, but getting off the comma for me means being able to take charge of my life and choosing not to continue sitting in a place that feels stuck or stagnant. Because the pause never really has a timeline. Like you can let it drag on and on and on and on. And I might even still be on that comma if I hadn't taken a leap or a chance, even on myself. Like I may have just stopped teaching altogether. So for me, getting off the comma means choosing to see myself as powerful.
And I would even add, just from the story that you've shared with us, and you correct me where I'm wrong, but it's not just you wake up one day and suddenly, oh, here's a big thing I can do and take a leap. It's little leaps, it's little steps, little shifts, as you described. And sometimes the leap is taking a step, encountering someone, learning something, altering a belief, taking another step. And next thing you know, you look back and it was a leap.
Yes, for sure. Because during the time I was like, what am I doing? And it even felt like from week to week or month to month, like, do I want to keep going this direction? Is this going to work out? And I didn't even really have, at the time, it didn't seem like direction, but now it really seems clear that it was, because I kept knowing like what my value of teaching was, who I wanted to reach. So yeah, I think if I'd known at the time that my end point would be getting to a studio, I might have steered myself differently. I might have said, oh, well, I need to be focusing on that, or like getting more business experience, when really what I needed was learning how to work with people, learning how to hear what they needed. Yeah. And really stepping into that a little bit more, of just trusting that the process was going to unfold itself where I needed to go, and following the breadcrumbs. Because at the time, like, am I doing this right? But I think that's what, there really was no right way to do it. It was, am I living authentic to like my integrity in this practice? Am I saying yes to the projects that actually light me up, that I know in my heart are what is needed to be out there? And even though no one else is doing it, and I know my dad would always say when I was younger, like, see a need and fill it. Like that's how you end up being successful. Or I think he would even say, like, if you want to be an inventor or whatever it was, like if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, see a need and fill it. And I just kept trusting that, like, I see a need here, I'm going to go fill it. I see a need there, I'm going to go fill it. And that is what led me to the opportunity of where I am now.
And you know what else it seems is you weren't just doing that for others, you were doing that for yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'll throw this in before we wrap, because I think it's so important and so powerful. And I'm going to put it in here or highlight it, because this comes up in coaching all the time. And I'm sure it does with you and your clients, is you didn't necessarily know where you were going ultimately. And in the absence of a what's the thing, you described focusing on what would that thing bring me, or what are the things that are important to me. So you didn't know you were going to land back in a studio, but you said, I was focusing on relationships, I was focusing on these things. And that's sometimes what can be so powerful, right? It's like, I don't really know where this is all going, but I do know I want freedom, or I do know I want this, I do know I want that. And so you kind of just put the supplemental pieces in place until they turn into whatever the ultimate tangible thing is, right?
Yes. And I love that you said that, Paul, because to bring it full circle, like the studio I ended up buying was that one that was in my hometown that I originally taught at. And at the time that it became available finally for me to buy this business, I wasn't even working there. I was managing another studio because I'd gone off to like, okay, I'm going to follow where I think I need to be. And because of my growth, like so many things. But when the original owner called me, she said, like, I've been watching what you're doing. Like, I see where you're going. And I know you've always loved this studio. Do you want to buy it? Like, I'm ready to retire. And I was like, I don't know how, but yes. Like, in me, like that moment, it was such an easy yes, in the sense of it ticked all the boxes. I was like, I know this is the community now that I need to be in. And I wouldn't have been ready for it if I hadn't gone out and done everything else for a couple years to be able to come back. And so that was a really big, I think, just reinforcer to me of what you just said there as well, like trusting that you don't have to know what the end goal is. I actually never would have dreamed that that would have actually been it. Like when I got the call, like, is this real life? I told my husband, like, what? I never thought I would have heard those words. Do you want to buy this studio? I was like in this daze for a while of like, is this really happening? Is this really true? And it was because I trusted the relationship building and the quality of experiences and cultivating the community. And so I was ready to step in, and it's like so much better than I even imagined. I think of like my old dreams of it now, and it doesn't even compare. Like I couldn't have dreamt up as good as it is now.
Wow. Ah, that is so powerful. I love that. Steph, as we look back on the conversation we've just had, what would you acknowledge yourself for?
For seeing the beauty in my journey. Because I think a lot of times we look back and we go like, oh, well, this was hard. Oh, and like, I can see how it all added together, but like, oh, and today was a really fun reflection to say, like, look at how the humanness of it, the being messy, was actually so cool and beautiful.
I love that. Okay. So, Steph, tell us, where could people find you if people want to look you up, see what you're up to, or maybe reach out and try to make contact with you? We'll put the info in the show notes, but tell us where folks can find you.
Yes, come join me. We are at Santosha Yoga Collective in Loomis, California. So if you want to find me actually in person, I do teach there weekly. We're northeast of Sacramento, but we have a website, which I know, Paul, you're going to put in the show notes. And I'm also on Instagram. So you're welcome to message me there, follow along with what we're doing, both with the studio and with my own personal coaching and yoga teaching. We have a lot of really cool things coming up. I mean, always, I wanted our studio to be a center of continuing education. So very literally, we have people that come in from around the country for trainings and workshop opportunities. So that might be you. If you're going to follow along and see what we're doing next, come play.
Thank you for sharing that, Steph. So yes, it's all in the show notes. Also, one thing that we do here on the podcast is very important to me because I feel like it's part of your story. And it's also about continuing to give voice to others and lifting others up. We call this acknowledgements. So what I'd love for you to be able to do is to share anyone that you would acknowledge, and that can be an organization, a cause that matters to you, other creators, or even someone in your own world that you might like to promote a little bit and give voice to. So who would you like to acknowledge? And we'll put their information in the show notes as well.
Oh, thank you. Well, right now I am training with Inner Peace Yoga Therapy School based out of Colorado. And so I do want to acknowledge them. They're doing amazing work in the field of yoga, specifically in conjunction with healthcare. And the studies that we're doing this year will serve people in cancer care, in recovery from addiction, in all sorts of different modalities that like yoga can serve on a much deeper level. And so their trainings are just next level. And we're working in collaboration with them this year at the studio specifically. I also want to locally acknowledge our Placer County Latched group. They come to our studio a couple times a month. It's a totally free service for new parents, specifically looking for lactation support. But this is run by NICU nurse moms who do this as volunteers. They saw a need that moms, after insurance ran out, there was just no support. And so they said, well, after the hospital experience, we want to have a community where moms can come and still continue to get education, guest speakers, and just that like mom club, basically to feel like they're not alone in that transition to parenthood. So they're an amazing group. They don't charge anything for their service, and that's twice a month at our space. The last group is Everyone Matters Ministries. They were in a coffee house next door to our studio, which has now transitioned, but the ministry still exists. They're based locally, and they provide housing to individuals and families who need temporary support while they're going through recovery or rehabilitation services. So it's very close to the mission of the studio and a lot of the trauma-based and yoga therapeutic work that we do. And we support their cause as well and do collaborative karma classes every month. Karma is the yoga of action. And so we support them with a donation-based class monthly. I would also like to acknowledge Alexis Bernard. She was my coach, and she has been a wonderful resource even as I was going through coach training. She came in as a guest coach and talked to us all about coaching versus therapy, which I think is so valuable to know too. In any of these kind of healing and wellness and holistic modalities is knowing your scope of work. So Alexis has been amazing with her Intentionally Me company that she runs.
Wonderful. And now it's my opportunity to say, I too know Alexis, and I have worked with Alexis on a number of things, and she and I did a workshop together in the past. So I will also personally vouch for Alexis. She's wonderful. So awesome. Steph, I have so enjoyed getting to know you further through your story. And there's so much in your story that resonates for me, and a couple of things in there that I'm going to take away and reflect on based on some commas that I'm sitting on right now as well. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for being with us. We will see you again in the future for a guest check-in, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul. This was a joy.
Thank you. What an honor it is for me to witness these powerful stories. I hope you feel the same way too. Think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. Surprises can reveal themselves to you when you do this. And if you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. Let's spread the word. Let's continue to build connection. And if you do discover something you'd like to unpack further, book a call with me and let's talk about it. My links are in the show notes. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast here on this platform and social media at Off the Comma, and feel free to comment and interact with these posts and episodes. Check out my website for workshops, events, and my sponsor community. I'm covering the costs of production by curating my own sponsors who align with our vision. Be sure to check them out. They're all powerful people and businesses. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. As always, keep noticing and keep listening.